block 2 of our Block of the Month Club. This is a long-term 20 block series where we're going to be knitting Norah's Vintage Afghan. So if you missed the first video, we posted that last month, and you can jump in and start with whatever block you like. Just download the pattern and follow along with the corresponding tutorial. I would encourage you first, though, to watch the prep video where I talk about the Block of the Month prep video, how to set up your pattern, and give you some hints and tips for success within this whole series. So check that out. I'll put the links for that down below. So you'll notice on block number 2 that it starts out in a similar way to block number 1. Our cast on number is slightly different, but we're still going to knit the first 4 rows of garter stitch, and then the 5th row will be that little bit of a texture, and then 4 more rows of garter. So the first 9 are the same as they were in block number 1, and then we'll get into the cable chart. So I want to take a moment to give a special public shout out and a heartfelt thank you to 3 of my patrons. This video specifically is brought to you by Jill Reis, Phyllis Weaver, and Ada Morris. Thanks so much for becoming patrons and helping to support the Purl Together YouTube channel. I truly appreciate it. So if you're interested in becoming a patron and the perks that go along with your patronage, there are various levels of support. So go over to patreon.com/Purl Together and check out the perks that you can get by supporting our Purl Together YouTube channel. I'm doing the long tail cast on here. If you need a slower tutorial video for that, I'll put a link down below. We're casting on 59, so that's a couple more than our first block. But cables tend to use up quite a bit, so we need a couple extra stitches. We'll have more cables going different directions in this block. So you'll always want to double check your cast on to make sure that it's the correct number. I even sometimes triple count if I get interrupted. All right, I've double checked my cast on amount, and I also want to make sure to mention that you do need to swatch for this. You make sure that your gauge is still on for block number 2, because you want block number 2 to be the same dimensions as block number 1, so that when we go and sew them all together at the end, they will all be the correct dimensions. All right, I've knitted my garter stitch, and one thing I want to point out as we begin row number 5 is that the odd numbered rows in this particular pattern, well, at least block number 1 was this way, and it appears block number 2 is as well. The odd numbered rows are on the wrong side, and the even numbered rows are the right side, which will become apparent as we begin the chart. But I just wanted to point that out, that, you know, I'm used to knitting like this where your tail begins rows 1, 3, 5, and so forth, and I always kind of looked for that. But this particular pattern seems to be the opposite, at least in these first 2 blocks, where your odd numbered rows are going to be on the wrong side of your work. So we're beginning row 5, and that's just simply 1 by 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, all the way across. And then we're going to just complete another 4 rows of garter stitch. All right, I finished the textured row 5, which was just the alternating knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, and then we did 4 more rows of garter stitch. Now we're ready to begin row 10, which is actually an increase row here. So sometimes people make mistakes when they're not really mindful of the punctuation in a pattern. So right here, we're going to knit 1, make 1, and we're going to do what's inside the parentheses 3 times. So do that first before you move on. So the comma there is important. Then we're going to do what's inside this parentheses a total of 17 times, and then finish off the way we started on that row. So it's just important to be mindful of the parentheses and the commas when you're reading a pattern such as this. So if you also look at the very back page of the pattern, I think it's page 23, it gives the abbreviations for how to make one. Now normally I like to do my regular lifted increases, but I am sticking with what the pattern says for this one, which is a bar increase. So we're going to start off by knitting 1 and making 1. So the pattern author suggests that we use the bar here, go in with your left needle from front to back and lift it up on the left needle, and then simply knit right into the back of that. So that's the make 1. So we're going to do that, those 2 stitches 3 times to start with. So knit your next one, go pick up the bar with the left needle from front to back. I do that little rolling maneuver to get into that back of that stitch. I'll show you that again. It just makes it easier. So rather than trying to just poke straight into the back and risking splitting the yarn, I kind of go ahead and put it in the front and just roll my needles around each other to get into the back. And then I knit into the back of the stitch. Okay, so that was 3. Now I'm going to do the middle part 17 times. So knit one, make one, knit two, make one. Okay, so you go across like that, and I'll see you at the other end of the row. One super important thing I want to point out here, because I have been knitting something in the round lately, and I actually messed myself up when I first started this chart, is remember, we are knitting back and forth. We are knitting a flat piece back and forth. So when we are on the right side of our work, we go from right to left across, but when we're on the wrong side of our work, we want to go from left to right. So since row 1 is the wrong side, the odd numbers are the wrong side, the even numbers are the right side, we want to begin the chart over here at D. And notice the chart notes down below tell us that. On the wrong side, begin at D, work to B, repeat between C and B, and then end at 8. So that just means we're going to begin over here and go work our way across, repeating this part in between the red lines as many times as necessary. I believe it's 12 if you do the math, and then work to the end of A. Then when we turn our work and we're back on the right side, we simply go up to row 2 and go like this. So we're actually working our chart in a zigzag way, across, up, across, up, across, up, like this, rather than, you know, always reading from right to left. So I already messed myself up once doing that. It happens. I just forgot I was going back and forth. So since we're beginning row 1 on the wrong side row, we're going to begin at D with 3 knits. 3 knits, 1 purl, 6 knits, 3 purls. Now if you can kind of work yourself out a pattern so you don't have to watch the chart stitch by stitch by stitch, you can know that these are going to be 6 knits, 3 purl, 2 knits, 1 purl. So that's kind of a 3, 2, 1, 6, 3, 2, 1, 6, 3, 2, 1, 6. Do you see what I mean? All right, on row 2, we're back to the right side where most of us are probably more comfortable. And so we're just going to knit 1, purl 1, and then we're going to take a look at what that red symbol means. So knit 1, purl 1. Now if you'll notice on your key, the red symbol here just simply says slip 3 stitches off the cable needle, or pardon me, slip 3 stitches to the cable needle and hold in front. All right. So 3 to the cable needle, hold in front, and then the next part of that instruction tells us to purl 1 from the working or the left needle, and then we're simply going to knit the 3 off the cable needle. So all we've done is shifted those 3 stitches a little bit to the left. Okay, now we will purl 3, and then take a look at what that light pink symbol means. Okay, slip 1 to the cable needle and hold it in the back. Now you can do these without a cable needle if you like, but honestly, if it's 3 or more, I'd rather not, and I certainly don't want to drop this lone one and have it like slip all the way down rows and rows, because that gets tedious to try to fix, and it's difficult. So now we're going to do a little ribbing almost for the next 3 stitches. Purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, and then purl the one from the cable needle. So that's kind of interesting. Then we're going to purl the next stitch and do the same cable maneuver that we did for the red one. So slip 3 off to the front, and you can see that that's what's going to happen because our next 3 are knits. From when we did our wrong side row, they were purls on the back side. Now on the front side, you can see that those are knits, and so that makes sense. So I'm going to hold those off to the front, purl the next one, and knit those. So that's going to be our 3-stitch cable that travels up and leans to the left here. Okay, now we want to purl the next 3. Now I'm up to the red line on that first section, and it says purl 2 up to the red line. But since we're repeating the section between the red lines, we're going to go, I'm currently at the last purl stitch on row 2 near letter C. But I'm going to go back to the beginning of that section between the red lines, and I have one more purl stitch where I am at B. Hopefully that makes sense. And now we have the light pink cable symbol again, which is slip one off, and then purl one, knit one, purl one. And you see how this is going to go. This is going to make an interesting section here because I'm only going to really have one stitch that's super visible from this cable. These purl stitches are kind of going to fade into the background as I'm working my way up. So let me move that top needle out of the way so you can see I'm just purling that off my cable needle. And now I'm going to purl one and continue on. And you can see, you can read your knitting and you can see what comes next. I have 3 knit stitches left. So those are the ones I'm going to slip off on the cable needle, hold them to the front. And those 3 stitches are going to travel throughout this pattern. They'll travel together. And you'll see that become clear. So go ahead and continue with row 2. And then we'll go back and have a little reminder about what to do on row 3. All right, so I decided to get brave and try to do this without a cable needle. So I'll show you how I've worked that out. And again, if you knit really tightly, this may not be a good idea for you. I also have yarn that has really good memory, so the stitch tends to stay there and like hold itself up for a second in case I need to grab it if I make, if I mess up. But again, this is like one of those do at your own risk kind of things. So right now I've just come up to, I'm between B and C on row 2, and I've come up to the dark red cable. So I'm going to take my back needle, and I'm doing these with my new ChaioGoo needles because they're also super pointy. And I'm going to go into this 4th stitch right underneath it like that. And I'm going to pinch these other 3 off, remove my left needle, and sneak it right back in all 3 of those, being careful not to split anything. And then I'm going to bring the 4th one, pull it over to the right gently and place it back on. And that's the one I'm going to purl. So I'm just going to go ahead and purl that while I still have a hold of it. Okay, I'm going to purl that off, and then I'm just going to knit the next 3. Okay, then I purl 3, and I'm back to the pink square, or pink cable symbol. Sorry, it's not really a square, it's a rectangle. Okay, and now for that one, I want these 3, this one would be held to the back, and so these 3 here need to come across the front of this one. So what I'm going to do here is leave my yarn in the front, and I'm going to go and sneak my right hand needle under all 3 of those, being careful not to split anything. I'm going to pinch this one, or just simply grab it. Either hold it against the needle, or you can grab it with your fingers. Slip out my left needle and go grab that before I drop it. Bring those 3 stitches across to the right and replace them back onto the left side working needle. And then I'll go ahead and work them as instructed. Purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, and then purl the one that would have been on my cable needle. All right. Then I purl 1, and now I'm going to do the other maneuver again. I'll show you one more time. I'm just going to go behind all 3 of those stitches and get my needle into that one. Pinch those 3 off. Bring my left needle around and replace them carefully. Bring the right hand needle back, replace that one, and purl it. That's what would have been on my cable needle. And then I'll just go ahead and knit those. So that's up to you whether you want to risk all that or not. I don't know. I guess I'm living a little dangerously because I'm only here in the beginning, so it's not a huge crisis if I end up having to frog or tink back a row or something happens. Yeah, so I'll definitely leave that up to your discretion, how tightly you feel you knit and the quality of your springiness of your yarn, and whether you feel your yarn has enough memory to, hold itself up if you happen to drop a stitch. Okay, so now I'm going to do the pink square again. Last time I'll show you that one. So I want these 3 or this one would be one I would go to the back with. So I'm going to sneak my right hand needle underneath these three because they're the three that I'm going to bring over, travel across to the right, slip that left needle out, grab that back up, take everything back and replace it back on the left, and then I can work them as instructed once I get my yarn off to the front so that I can purl this first one. Whoops. Okay, purl one, knit the next, purl one, and then I'll purl the one that is traveling across the back. I did have a little bit of a split stitch though, so let me fix that. I saw that strand there that was in the wrong spot. Okay, so I hope that helps. Now, when we go to row 3, just make sure that you're working from left to right on your wrong side rows. All right, I finished row 3, and you can really see the cables and the patterns starting to emerge. You can tell that this is going to look like, even though it's a cable that's worked across 3, but because we have this section that is purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, it almost looks like a single that's moving across. And then here's our dark red symboled ones where we are traveling with 3 across. So that's interesting. So row 4 is almost the same as row 2, except that your cables and the symbols are just shifted over one. So just watch your pattern. Work rows 4 and 5, and then I'll show you what comes next on row 6 with the blue symbols. All right, I've just completed row 5 where I just went back across the opposite way and I knitted the knits and purled the purls. So now we're going to start on row 6 on the right side row, and this is kind of a funky situation here. So this is a cable progression that's going to go across 6 stitches, so that's rather significant, and there's also some purls involved too. So let's take a look at what all that means. All right, let me just say for this maneuver, I believe you are definitely going to want a cable needle. I would not attempt this without one. Slip 4 stitches to the cable needle and hold to the back. Now we want to purl 1, knit 1, purl 1 for our next 3. Purl 1, knit 1, and I suspect this is where our 2 cable sequences are going to cross one another. All right, so we purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. We're going to slip the last stitch. Let me get the right hand needle out of the way. This last one that looks like a purl, you're just going to slip that just end to end, just slide that back over onto the left needle so then we can work it. Leave these other 3 hanging out there, okay? And then we're just going to go ahead and purl that as instructed. All right. It's a little fiddly. Whoops, that's because I split the stitch. Hang on. Okay. Then we're going to knit the other 3 off like normal. And then you'll see what that's going to look like. This is in fact the junction of the 2 cable sequences, or 2 cables that we've been traveling across this whole time. So if you look, this was the 3 stitch one that we've been moving off to the left, and then we have our other one that has a purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, and now we've crossed them. Okay, so now we're going to purl 5 and do that again. I'll show you that one more time. Now we're going to do that maneuver again. Now we've reached the point in our chart where we are repeating between the red lines. So you can see that the 5 purl stitches are in the middle, and then we have half of that cable. Here, I'll just show you. We have half the cable here and half the cable here. We've just finished these 5. So this just means the next 4 stitches here, you're going to pretend this is copied and pasted over here, and you're just going to continue repeating the inside of this until you have, how many is that? 7 stitches left. But you're going to be in the middle of this cable when you reach here. So really, after your last cable of the row, you're only going to have 4 stitches left. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So let's do that one more time. Okay, we're going to slip 4 stitches off and hold them to the back. All right, and then we're going to purl one, knit one, purl one, because that's the same 3 stitches we've been traveling across the purl background with. Now we're going to take the purl stitch off of the left end of our cable needle. Let me just move that out of the way for you a little bit and scooch these to the end. We're going to try to get this out of the way so you can see there. We're going to take this and slip that back onto the left needle. Okay, bring our yarn back to the front of our working. Purl that. So we have that between our traveling stitches, just like before. We had that purl stitch separating the cable styles before. And then we're going to knit these 3 off. And we have crossed our sections of 3 that have been traveling, have crossed one another. See? Okay, then we're going to purl 5 and keep doing that all the way across. Now that we've completed row 7, you can really start to see the pattern emerge. So row 6 is where we crossed over, you know, these 2 cable traveling stitches. And now you can see what's going to happen, and you can predict what's going to occur as you come up to it. So as we knit along here, you know, if you're following along, if the pattern follows along with what we've been doing, and there's no reason to believe it won't, if you look at the beginning of row 8, we have the light pink cable symbol first, which means the one that leans to the right. So you know you're going to, you know, purl up to that, and then these are going to cross over this one, and it's going to continue traveling to the right. These 3 will cross over this purl stitch right here. And then these 3 knit stitches will be held to the front and will cross over this purl stitch, and then we'll carry on. I mean, you can see what's going to happen here as we make the lattice that's going to be our block. Okay, so I'm going to knit the next several rows up until we get to row 12, I believe, and then I'll show you the last cable crossover, which will be similar to this but performed slightly differently. All right, I'm on row 12. So as you can see, this is really clearly defined now, and the cables are going to cross again here. So I've knitted the first bit, knitted and purled the first part, and now the big yellow block indicates that I'm going to slip 4 stitches to the cable needle and hold in the front. Okay, 4 and hold to the front. Then I'm going to purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. So we're kind of just doing the reverse of what we've done before as far as the sections of stitches that need to go over versus under. So, but you can certainly see the similarities to when we did the crossover before. Okay, now we want to slip the last niche back, the last stitch, pardon me, this purl one here, we want to put that back on the left needle like we did before, and we're going to go ahead and work that one. So we have our purl stitch in between our travelers. I call them travelers. And then we're simply going to knit these last 3 off. Okay, yeah, that looks pretty good. So now you can see how this is going to be, how these diamonds are going to start to take shape with the over and under with the lattice. All right, so just carry on, making sure that you're repeating between the red lines as appropriate. Then you're just going to start right back on row number 1. I've knitted through a couple of chart repeats and you can see it's starting to look really good. One thing I wanted to show you though is overall you need to be mindful, like I've talked about the lattice work, where you have the alternating over and under. If you find that you have made a mistake and miscrossed a cable, I just wanted to show you real quick how I would go about tinking a cable back. So I noticed that this one has been miscrossed because both of the thicker cables are going up and over the single strand one, or the single column one with this one knit stitch. So you can see that this one should be underneath the thinner one. So I'm just going to show you how I would go about tinking this back. Now clearly these first 3 stitches need to come back off because I should have held them to the back instead of holding them to the front. So I'm just going to go in with my cable needle and tink those back off. And then also the next one is a purl stitch that should be on the left end of my cable needle. So I'm going to go in right here and take this off carefully, putting it on my left knitting needle, then I'll slip it back onto the cable needle the way that it was originally. Then I can just simply tink back the next 3. And then, yay, I'm back to where I can put this cable needle in the back as it should have been initially and go ahead and perform the cable over again. All right, so this is what your square looks like after 3 chart repeats. One last thing I think it's important to point out as you're going through here is on the wrong side of your work, a lot of times you do just knit the knits and purl the purls. However, there are times at the ends where that is not the case, meaning at the edges or the ends of the rows. For example, right here, this set of 3 that travels is a purl, knit, and a purl, which makes it appear as if it's a single stitch column that travels up. However, it switches. It switches here to the other style where it's 3 knit stitches that travel. So be mindful of following carefully on the wrong side rows at these transition points where it becomes the other style of cable. So you can see here it's the single column knit stitch 1, but then it morphs into the set of 3. And that will happen again up here. So I just wanted to point that out, where most of the time in the center of your work, you do just knit the knits and purl the purls on the wrong side rows, but that's not always the case on the edges, I have discovered. All right, I've knitted through the chart 5 times, and then on the 6th time, I've done rows 1 through 11 as directed. Now, if you're looking at this and you lose track of how many times you've gone through the chart, if you notice way down here in the beginning, this first cross is like row, I think it's 5. Let me look back. But then the other cross is up at the top. That's row 12. So this must be 6 and then 12. So if you count the thicker cable crosses, that's 1 chart repeat, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm almost to the 6th. So if I were to continue on row 12, which I'm not, then my next row would be crossing those 2. So now I'm ready to do the decrease row, because remember we increased all the way up to 99 stitches, and now before we finish off the block we need to decrease all of those away again. So I'm back on the written instructions for square 2, and the decrease is just going to follow along again, being mindful of where the commas are in that sentence. Now I'm probably not going to count 17 times. What I'm going to do is do this first one 3 times as shown, and then where it says knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 2 together, I'm going to continue doing that sequence until I only have, let me think, 6 stitches left, because then, or 7 stitches left, because knit 2 together 3 times would be the equivalent of 6 stitches, and the remaining one would be 7. So rather than counting the 17 times, I'm just going to do this sequence in the parentheses here until I have 7 stitches left, and I should end up with the 59, but of course I will double count that and verify. After my decrease row, I do have 59 stitches, and so now I'm just going to carry on with the instructions the same as rows 1 through 9. So 4 rows of garter stitch, the 5th row will be the knit 1, purl 1 for texture, and then 4 rows more of the garter stitch. So I'm ready to bind off. I'm really happy with how this square looks, but I tell you what, I used a lot of yarn, more so than the first block, as you might expect, just because, you know, cables eat up a lot, and we also increased to at least 10 more stitches across than we did with the first block. So be mindful of that. I do have an extra skein in case I would have needed to bust that out to finish, but I think I'm going to make it. I only have this much left, but all I have left is my bind off row. Then I'll block it, and if you're wondering how to block your squares, I do have a video on that I'll link down below in the description, and then I'll show you what it looks like. So binding off, again, you're just going to knit the first one, knit the second, and you know, make sure it's loose enough, and then you're going to just pull that first stitch over the top of the second. And I pull through a little bit more yarn just to make sure that you want to bind off loosely. I mean, not sloppy loose, but loose enough that, you know, you certainly don't want anything to pucker. You can see that's going to make a nice edge on for sewing later. All right, I'm super happy with how this block turned out. I'm adding some more pins in the middle of my block just because I have cats that that think this is their personal butt mat. And then they like to, and I mentioned that several times before, but it's, you know, it's an ongoing issue, and we have several cats. So always a consideration. All right, knitters, that wraps up block number 2. So you are now 10% done with your vintage Afghan. So join me next month. For the first Tuesday of the month, we'll have block number 3. And also, next week, we'll be starting our colorwork hat knit along. So be sure to join me for that. I'll have a prep video out later this week. It'll just be a short little 3 to 5 minute video letting you know supplies, and we'll look at the pattern briefly, and we'll get ready to start that next week on Tuesday. So, all right, thanks once again for joining me. Like and subscribe, and join me over on Patreon if you're interested in the benefits of becoming a patron of Purl Together.